Dzień dobry Państwu. Dzisiaj będziemy mieli przyjemność. I have an pleasure and honor to introduce Dino Dini, a man who was a father of the modern football games. In fact, their ideas which he introduced in his Kickoff and Kickoff 2 are still alive in modern football games, like Pro Evolution Soccer and, unfortunately, FIFA. Dino, we have at least two things in common. First one is the January 1998, where this month is very important for both of us. 1st of January at 22 minutes past 11, you started works on Kickoff 1.
1988.
1988, yes, okay. Yes, sorry. And 23 days after, I met a girl. And then I became married and you became a legend. And the second point in the time was somewhere 1993, the CTS, when I saw a man with balls. To be honest and to be precise, it was the container of balls. And one of these balls I have here. And if you act as researcher of the ancient artifacts, you probably see the sign of famous game designer Dino Dini.
Yes. It's a bit smudged and has not stood the test of time. Can I do anything about that?
You can give it another sign.
All right.
And just after that, we return to the history between these 2 points of time. Oh, thank you very much. So, you started your adventure with programming very, very early in your life. Before you became a well-known programmer, you were able to program even a computer without display and develop rhythm game without music. What was your way to kick off?
First of all, I have to say you've done incredible research on things. I didn't even know there was a time for the start of Kickoff. It's amazing. I'll have to ask you where you found that, because it's amazing. But anyway, look, yes. So where I started off was, well, I don't know. At the age of 5, I was interested in technology enough to burn myself with a soldering iron. I always liked machines, and I even made games before I had a computer, before, just by wiring lights and together and stuff. And then eventually, my timing was perfect, because at the age of like 13, it became possible to bring a computer into your home. So the first one that I did was this Acorn System 1, and it had a hex pad, like 16 keys. You programmed it in hex. It had a little calculator display, and I made games on that thing to run on the 7-segment displays of the thing without, and it just as a natural progression, because I was always trying to make things with electronics, but that is difficult, because you've got to get all the components together and you've got to wire them up. You've got to use a printed circuit board. They were difficult to make, and then or you just wired them on VeriBoard, all these wires. It took ages to do anything. And so when the computers came along, it's like I can make machines that do things without having to actually go through all that pain of wiring stuff together. I can just tell it what to do, and it's going to do it. And so, of course, that was convenience. So it was great. And it sort of went on from there. I went into an amusement arcade, maybe a little bit before, I don't know. I'm shaky on the exact year. But there was a game called Blockade, which was like the original version of Snake, I think. Blockade, there was a Space Invaders over here, and further down, trying to understand what that game was, I saw, I think it was Space War. It was a vector game with gravity in it, you know, and so on. And these, and of course, being someone who was obsessed with machines that were alive, you know, I dismantled a watch when I was a child, my grandfather's watch, much to the distress of my parents. Because it was there, it was ticking. I remember looking at it, it was ticking. It's ticking, it's alive. How does this thing work? So I've always been fascinated. So it is inevitable when the computers came along. It's like, wow, what can I do with this? And then when I saw the games, I said, yeah, I want to make games.
And you have many computers, because as far as I noticed, it was every year you programmed something on the next other computer.
Yeah, it was crazy years, that. Because now we get, like, there's the new platform coming, the new console. There'll be a PlayStation 5, and it's like there's a period of like 5 years or something between them, and that's actually pretty rapid. It feels like it. As a game developer, by the time you got used to one, it's obsolete. But back then, they were changing every year, every 6 months. And everybody, there were so many different computers being made by so many different companies, and they were advancing at an incredible rate technologically. So, of course, being greedy, as human beings are, and I'm a human being, I guess, I was greedy, and so when the next technology came along, it's like, I've got to have that, because I can do more with it. You know, it's a thing which was like a portent of what was to come with the industry as a whole, I think. You know, it's just human nature. You want more. You know?
And what was the reason? Because when you decided to be a professional programmer, do you remember this moment?
Well, it was difficult because there wasn't such a thing, really. Even my vision, I mean, it existed, professional programmers, but they were working in big, huge companies. You know, I mean, the hobbyist programmer. When did the hobbyist programmer start thinking, I can earn a living from this? For me, it was when, I don't know how I got approached by it, but there was this company called Time Data, and they published a book called the Acorn Atom Magic Book. And I really cannot remember how I connected with the guy or whatever, but a lot of the listings in the Acorn Atom Magic Book were from me on my Acorn Atom. And those are the first things that I ever sold. And I think it was £400.
Well, lots of money.
Which, for a kid of 15, all those years, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, is, you know, was a lot of money. And so, of course, at that point, I was thinking, well, maybe I can make a career out of this.
But you didn't play football games, and you are not interested in football as a game. So why did you decide to write a football game?
Well, I didn't decide to write a football game so much as I decided I wanted to get back into making games. So Acorn System 1, and then I had the Acorn Atom, then I had the BBC Micro, then I went to university. Right?
Okay.
So, and during that time, I developed and had published, had small games published, and they still exist, amazingly. After university, I wanted to get back into games, so that's what, you know.
What did you study?
It was computer science.
Okay.
Right? But so to get back in there, I just looked for the nearest publisher that I had to where I lived, which happened to be Anko in Dartford. And then I went there and said, look, I can program. It was Anil Gupta. I was, you know, and he said, oh, well, look, I've got this little game called Trivia Trove. So if any of you come across a game called Trivia Trove, there is actually one on eBay. It's a German version. This would be the one for the Atari ST, because I did a port of the Amiga version to the ST. and very rare. And yeah, so I did that, and then when that was done, what next? And Anil just said, well, you know, I've been looking at football games, and they're not very good. So how about a football game? And I thought to myself, well, really, a football game? Football, I wasn't a fan of football because football is a sport. And I learned at school that sports were a great path to humiliation. You know? It's like that's what the association is for me. I was the guy who was picked last every time when they were selecting the teams. You know, so I think that's the reason. I actually followed international football quite, you know, once every 4 years. World Cup, I followed that quite passionately because there were two teams that there was England, because I grew up in England, but there was also Italy because both my parents are Italian. So it was kind of, you know, Italian in the blood. I mean, there's good football there, you know. But yeah, so I said it's what he wants, and instead of just running away and saying, no, that's not my cup of tea, which I could have done, I tend to take up a challenge. Sometimes the challenge is I'm presented with something that isn't my cup of tea. And maybe that's where I'm a bit odd, you know, because most people probably would just walk away, but I say, this isn't my cup of tea. Well, then that means it's a challenge. It's taking me out of my comfort zone. And so I tried. And then all hell broke loose eventually.
But by the way, you broke almost all rules in developing such games. And could you tell us about analysis you've done just before starting to design?
You see, this is a funny one because people think sometimes that, you know, you design something, you have ideas, and it's all about having ideas, and it's not. Being a designer is all about stopping having ideas. You've got to, when you create a design, you have to actually nail stuff down. And so the actual evolution of Kickoff comes from the constraints that I chose and faced on the hardware. So it really, I had to make a choice, right? Where do I start? And there I followed a rule that I follow, which is if you want to make something, if you want to, for example, make a football game, then it's in the clue, the clue is in the name of the game, it's football, right? So the two most important things are feet and balls, right? So I made the ball, so I did a test with that. I also needed a pitch, of course, so I did a test with that. I needed to know if I could actually make the thing run at the frame rate I wanted, because I wanted 50 frames per second. I wanted it in perfect lock with the TV. That was non-negotiable for me. So I did a test to make sure I could do that. And in fact, the test to make sure I could do that is where a lot of the design decisions came from. But because I chose to make the game run in 50 frames per second, right? So that's why it's a top-down view, because with the hardware that was available then, that was really the only choice. I chose to make the pitch real size. Why? Because that's the size of the pitch. One thing I did notice about other games was that the sprites were huge and the pitch was therefore tiny, and it just felt really silly. I mean, it's like, is this football or is this like a variation of ice hockey? You know, is it really 11-a-side football or is it 5-a-side football in a park somewhere, you know, with bags as the goalposts? I mean, what are we doing? So these key choices actually drive everything. If you want to do that well on an Atari ST, you end up with that result. The only other one to think about is like horizontal or vertical, right? If I made it horizontal and I've got to have an isometric view, I'm not going to be able to see into the goal mouths, because the goals are going to look like that. Unless I force the perspective, but I didn't want to. Because I forced the perspective, that's crazy, that just looks ugly. So that's why it's not sideways. It's vertical, because that way you can see into the goal. Of course, downstairs at the bottom goal mouth, it's kind of reversed, which always bugged the hell out of me, but there was no solution, so I went with it. I could have forced the perspective, but that would be breaking a rule. Do you see where it comes from? And so it's just that. It's basically you choose You start off by choosing a set of rules that you think will lead you in the right place, and the way I chose those was by primarily trying to be faithful to what football really is. So the other games that were out there kind of didn't do this. They didn't start with the ball. That's why the ball stuck to the foot in many other games. And for me, it was the ball is not stuck. If I make the ball stuck to the foot, I might as well call it handball or carry ball. And that's all I did. And it's what I call going back to the source. So if you really want to make a successful reinterpretation of anything, go back to find it, the heart of what it is. And when you find that heart, you've got to build everything else around that. And then you've captured the essence of what you are doing. So even though my games are not, you look at them, they're not playing like real football. They have the spirit of real football. That's it.
And you've designed Kickoff first on Atari ST,
Yeah.
and then you made a version for Amiga.
Yeah.
And the first version, took you about 15 months, and Amiga version 6 weeks.
Yeah, there's great research there. It's brilliant. It's exactly right. Yeah, 15 months to make Kickoff. And I have to say, it was not me and a company. It was just me. The publisher gave me some graphics. They had somebody do some graphics. So it's not 100% everything in the game is me, but it's like 95. It's the important bits, all the programming and design. So that took 15 months on the ST, and it started with the ST because that's the computer I had. The first one after the 16-bit era, or 8-bit era I should say, was the ST. The reason it only took 6 weeks to do the port was because the two computers shared the same CPU. There's 68,000 CPU of the same speed, approximately 8 megahertz. The Amiga had much better hardware. So all I needed to do was figure out how to get the graphics to exploit that hardware, which I did. But the gameplay was interchangeable because I made the code in such a way that it was possible to swap out the graphics side. Even though I was writing in assembler, I was still writing modular code. And I've got a lot of hobby horses, as you might guess, and one of them is if you want to write modular code, having to use object-oriented programming and where computer science has gone and all of this bloated software that we have. But there is a point which is you can do all of that even if you're writing in assembler. You know, it's about having a discipline in the way you program. And I knew I was going to be porting it, so I built the original with that in mind. And that's why it was, yeah, it literally was about 6 weeks.
But the Amiga version was in sort of better than, there are the differences between these two versions.
I mean, graphically is the main difference. Yeah. The ST doesn't have any pitch graphics because there was no hardware scrolling. I don't know how technical the audience is here, but look, if you've got a background that moves, there are two ways of doing it. One way is that you have to redraw the background. So the computer has to clear the screen or redraw the screen starting from a different place. It's a really simple idea. And you do that very fast, and then the background moves. But that is really slow because the computer is sitting there having to move memory, the graphics that you have in memory, to the screen all the time. And the computers at that time couldn't do this fast enough, even with these 8 megahertz process, 8 megahertz. Now we're at 4 gigahertz or something. You know, it's like 500 times faster these days. So you could do it now, but back then you couldn't. And so what there was is this thing called hardware scrolling. So that's just like, there is the hardware that pulls all the data out of memory and throws it on your TV screen, and you just change the address where it starts. And then you can make the whole background scroll. The ST didn't have that. So, and because I wanted it to run at this fast frame rate, so what I did was I made the whole pitch out of horizontal and vertical lines only. There's no center circle because drawing a circle is really slow. The lines, you can use tricks because, you know, a horizontal line, it was like 8 bits in one go, a byte. So that's bang, 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 this way. The vertical algorithms for creating a vertical line you can make really efficient, but you want to do a circle, that's like a real pain. So there's no circles. And then I faked a grass by using a trick where you change the color of the background on the fly as the picture is being drawn on the TV using something called a horizontal interrupt. And that's it. But of course with the Amiga, it actually had a lot of stuff to help you accelerate the graphics. It had hardware scrolling, it had sprites, which I had really hardly used. It had 2 drawing plane, a foreground and a background, which you could do 8 colors in. So the pitch was really nice. The pitch was in one of those, and then the sprites were in the other. And so it was possible to draw on top of the pitch without erasing the pitch. I mean, you know, it's... So yeah, I made use of that, and that's why the 2 games are very different. It's actually the technical limitations of the system.
So, you achieved a success, great success with Kickoff, and in the same year, 1989, you decided to develop Player Manager.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because it was an awesome idea. It's like, well, look, what I'd done, made a match engine, and even in the original Kickoff, the players had attributes. And because I wanted to make it that it mattered who was on the pitch. And these are, you can see how the design works. Why would I make players that have different attributes? Because they have different names. But what does it mean to have different names if they're not different in some way? Then it becomes meaningless. Then it's just a dressing. It's not a design feature. It's just there's no point in having it there. So I had to have a reason for there to be a different identity for the different players on the field, and the only way to do that was to give them different attributes. But then if I've given them different attributes, then it becomes tempting to start thinking about, well, this player was injured in a match, so maybe for the next match, their attributes should be changed. Okay, when you choose who can play, okay, well, that came into Kickoff 2 more than Kickoff. But what about if the whole thing is put in context so that you play a series of matches and there's the consequences of what happens in one match, like a red card or a yellow card, has a consequence for the next match. So, we're talking about a management game. But I've got an engine where you can play, so it's never been done before, has it? Part of this is maybe conversations I had with Anil Gupta as well. It's never been done before, has it? You know, that there's been a combination of the football management and... Yeah. So, and I just, you know, I thought, we should call this Player Manager, because that's what it is. You're going to be able to play and manage. And that's why.
So you were involved, because it was your initiative to write this game, not Enco.
I mean, if I want to be perfectly frank, I don't know. I mean, what does it mean? I do know that at that time, I had conversations with Anil Gupta and we talked about what to do. What I do know is that it seemed like a great idea and I really wanted to do it. So, and I'm pretty sure I came up with a name, but who cares? What does it matter? You know? And then Anil, unfortunately, passed away some 15 years ago. But, yeah.
Okay, next year, next game. Kickoff 2. What did you want to improve in your first game by sequel?
Well, by this time there was quite a bit of feedback that had come from fans playing the game and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, so I wanted to sort of respond a little bit to that. Mainly, it was about plugging sort of loopholes in the goalkeeper, because people started to learn how to exploit the goalkeeper. And even Kickoff 2 has exploits, but people found these exploits after years and years of playing. I tried to deal with that, but then I wanted to tie it into Player Manager as well, because I said, okay, great. So now we've got people nurturing their own teams. Wouldn't it be great if they could play each other informally? They could load with their players, so they could load the players out of Player Manager and put them into Kickoff 2, so that you can actually play with the squad that you've been building. And That was a big thing. And then other things like action replays. And most important thing of all was the swerve, though, the aftertouch, because that wasn't actually in the original Kickoff. And it was an experimental idea, and that's the reason why it's not enabled by default, which was a mistake, I think. I should have been a little bit braver, because you have to actually turn it on. But when you turn it on, it allows you to swerve the ball. And the weird thing is that the intention for that was not originally to make it swerve the ball. The intention was to actually make you able to aim in more than 8 directions, because the Amiga joystick thing only had 8 directions. That's a problem when you're shooting, isn't it? So what you had to learn to do is move yourself in the right place, so when you shoot diagonally, you're going to shoot into the goal. That's not the way football is, right? You theoretically, within reason, score a goal from anywhere by choosing the direction. So, and I was racking my brains about this and thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I was sitting I think I was having lunch with Daniel, and I was sitting there, and I went, I got it. What I can do is I can make it, you can change the direction of the ball after you kick it. So that you choose the direction, and then afterwards, if you pull one other direction or the other, it changes the direction of the ball. And that requires breaking a rule, right? You have to, there's no other solution. It sounds odd to have the ball move after you kick it, but on the other hand, that was the only way I could achieve that. When I actually implemented it, it turned into a swerve. It was quite naturally, as a result, it was a swerve. And then that was even better. And I went, this is great. And so that's the origin of aftertouch, and why it's called aftertouch, because you touch it after. Yeah.
Okay, and after this really busy period, there was a great break before the next game, goal. Why? Because you left ANCO, or any other reason?
Yeah, after Kickoff 2, the monster, as I call it, popped up and said hello. You know, because what I'd done was I made a monster, and this whole thing. I don't know if any of you were at the party last night, because I never thought in a million years I'd be standing on stage with John Hare. Okay, and it's not John Hare. It's not the monster. I made a monster, and this. Any of you know about Phil Fish? Have you heard about Phil Fish? Because for some reason in Poland, it seems from my brief, people don't know what happened about Phil Fish. He made a game called Fez. Have you heard the game Fez? Okay, maybe, right. So Fez, and there was Indie Game the movie, which was featured. That okay, the story. Okay, Phil Fish is not making games anymore. Which is a statement. You know, game developer who's proven that they're able to make game developer no longer making games anymore is a sad idea. It eats me up every time I hear it. Okay, do you know why? Because he made a monster, and the monster devoured him. You've obviously heard of Notch and Minecraft. He's no longer making games. He created a huge monster. And he had to sever his ties with that monster in order to make sure that the monster did not devour him. I made a monster, and that monster complicated things tremendously. And it's one of the reasons why it took a little longer to get the game out, because I was getting distracted by things that were being said. I had a split audience. There were people who loved my game to death, and there were people who wanted to kill me. I exaggerate. I mean, these days there are actually death threats in social media, but no, I didn't really get death threats. But there was animosity. And you can see where this is heading, because then when Sensible Software made their clone of my game, a lot of the fans of their game turned against me, and the press did as well. This is the monster. It's a thing I think about a lot. why it is that when you create something bigger than yourself, sometimes it turns nasty. It's like Game of Thrones and the dragons, isn't it? You know, it's like you can't control it. And you have to learn how to make peace with it. And so yesterday was part of me making peace with my dragon, my monster, my war dragon, right? And so I'm kind of cutting through a few things here because, you know, so when I did Goal, that game faced the challenge of competing against the clone of my game that I was being vilified for by fans of the other game that would not have existed if it hadn't been for my game. Do you understand? This is really, really... And how old was I? I was still in my 20s, right? I'm 20-something having to deal with this. And that's, to cut a long story short, why the last game, one of the reasons why the last game that I published was actually, we did Goal, but then Goal was also done on the Sega Mega Drive, about 94, published on the same day as FIFA, which didn't help either. Yeah. So, and then the industry basically turned its back on indie game development, which is why these events are very important, by the way, because, you know, when PlayStation came out, the industry did turn its back on people who could do what some of us have done, like Jeff Minter, like actually Notch. I think Notch kind of probably actually contributed to the revival by pointing out to companies that you can spend 200 million on making a game, and on the other hand, you know, with a huge company and make a big show of it and all the rest of it. On the other hand, you can have a guy in a bedroom who makes a game that later sells for $3 billion. Right? That message was lost in the mid-90s, and so many independent game developers stopped doing what they could do. They stopped expressing their art in a way that they could do that without having to worry about where the next meal was coming from or keeping the roof over their heads. It's quite a sad thing. And I'm really delighted, I'm going off here as I do, but you know, I'm really delighted about the fact that Jeff Minter has found you know, a partnership with Sony who have changed their attitude entirely. They are embracing that, which is a no-brainer. I don't know about you, but I mean, you know, if I was really serious about taking a video game platform and the art of video games forward, and I had money and a company and a video game platform, I'd be going to people like Jeff Minter and saying, come on in, here's a red carpet for you. What do you need? What do you need? What can we do to help you make the great games that we know you can make and that will make our platform shine? Is that a no-brainer or what? But that isn't what happens. But now it's just happening. And that for me is, it actually really gives me a sense of courage. It's not about me, it's about, I want to see people who love what they do able to do it. And yeah. But sorry, I'm going off in all kinds of...
But we...
probably want to get me back on track now.
We'll back to 1994, 1992, in fact, to Goal. And it was completely redesigned game with zoom in, zoom out, and there was horizontal and vertical view, and very sophisticated tactic. And but it seemed to be a bit too late.
It was. Yeah, it was.
And why?
Well, I had this stuff to deal with. The monster was starting to distract me.
Okay.
The worst part of it was when there was the fake letter. Shall I tell about the fake letter?
Yes, 1994, Amiga World.
The Amiga Power magazine that had an editor or someone who was working there. His name was Stuart Campbell. It's a matter of public record. I mean, he was a journalist, so I shouldn't really be shy about saying who he was. And he really didn't like my game. And that's okay.
But was he a fan of Sensible Soccer? Or?
And then Sensible Soccer came out, and then he was absolute great fan of Sensible Soccer. Okay. That's okay. And I was just a guy who's still in his 20s, making the next game, caught up in the passion of doing what I love to do. I didn't give interviews. I didn't go around trumpeting my stuff. I didn't pay attention to what the publisher was really doing, but that's another story, and that's also a learned lesson, whatever. But I knew, even at my early age, I knew how dangerous it was to interact with the press. I knew about the monster somehow. And so what I did was I chose not, this is quite difficult for me, this is probably the most difficult thing that happened to me in my career, I'm saying now. I knew it was a bad idea to get involved because I knew already that some people were saying that my game was rubbish, and then they would love the other game, and I saw there was a war happening between my game and the other, and I just wanted to focus on what I'm doing. Thank you very much. And guess what happened? Amiga Power published a fake letter from me. And so my first message to the world as Dino Dini, the game developer, was a fake letter that made me look like the worst jerk that had ever walked on the face of the planet. And that was the, I don't know if you can imagine that. I did all the right things. I knew the danger of the living monster. The monster didn't care. It found a way to get to me anyway, because when that happened, and I complained to them about it, but this is back before the internet, so it took like 2 months before the retraction got printed, by which time the damage was done, by which time people who thought that I was a demon now had confirmation, but worst of all, that in my head, it screwed with my head. It screwed with who I was, with my own self-confidence, with my own identity. I started doubting myself. It's incredible. And yeah, it's like, that was it. And that happened while I was working on goal. And this is a huge distraction. The fact I managed to, in the end, actually get the thing done and make a good game. I have people who come up to me and say that they prefer goal to Kickoff and Kickoff 2. And there used to be a world championship for goal as well. I think I did a good job, but it was really in spite of this bloody monster that was behind me.
Okay. So, the last soccer game, maybe the last but one, it was in 1994. It was the port of Dino Dini Soccer on Mega Drive. And by the way, despite the limits of this platform, you were able to design a game twice as faster as on the Amiga.
Yeah, it was weird that. Because the point is that what the Mega Drive didn't have was a raster display, which basically means that you couldn't draw on it. You had to make everything up out of tiles. So this was quite a challenge to figure out how to fit all the graphics in, especially given the fact that there wasn't enough memory, video memory, for all the sprites. So by working with there was this thing called direct memory access, and it was basically, for those of you who are not technically minded, basically is instead of the microprocessor having to pull the data out of the ROM cartridge and put it into video memory, there was a piece of hardware that would do it instead. And it turned out that when I'd finished doing all of this, this engine was actually faster than on the Amiga, even though it seemed like that the platform was actually slower. And it allowed for some tricks, because as I pulled the information out of the ROM, it was sort of saved so that it could be reused when needed. It was like a cache. I don't know who knows what a cache is? I don't know okay, so that's for the technical-minded people. And PCs have cache these days. They've got fast memory and slow memory, and really fast memory is very expensive, so you have a little bit of fast memory, and most of your memory is slow. And then you sort of share that fast memory amongst for what you need. Turned out that this system with the DMA that I did created a cache, which allowed me to even recolor the sprites on the fly which is how I managed to make different players with different skin, because there wasn't enough memory for it. So I had to what I did was I took the color from the shoe and swapped the skin color for the shoe color. And it was good enough. You know, an artist would kill me, but it was good enough. It worked. And I could do it this slow. It's a very slow operation, but because there was a cache, it became transparent, and it had almost no impact. And this was good because, you know, Virgin at the time, they suddenly threw this curved ball at me. You know, they said, well, you know, you've got all of these players, but, you know, some of these players are black, and so the black players are appearing as white. And so, you know, we really need a solution to this. Are you mad? There's no way. But then I saw it, and there was a way. And yeah, I was particularly proud of that solution, I have to say. Anyway, yeah, so.
And we know about why you don't like play FIFA game. I know. Because maybe.
Well, I mean, the whole FIFA era is also the whole same as the era of the death of the indie game developer. The death, you know, the pushing aside of the independent game developer. There's no way that I could compete with companies that were doing that. And even if I had a better game, there wasn't really anything that I could do. So what I've seen is, because you say, oh, well, my games have influence. Maybe they have, but to a great extent, a lot of the important stuff I care about was not copied. and so for the artist in me is not so happy about that. But look, I mean, part of it is also, look, as a frustrated artist, I'm going to vent my frustration at large corporations that represent that demise of a very special thing that now there's hope is reviving, the whole indie, because there's this term, indie games. But indie games was how the industry started. Let's get this straight. It was all indie games 25 years ago or whatever, or, you know, or games like Lemmings. You've all heard of Lemmings, right? Because I don't know the age of the audience here. Who's played Lemmings? Okay, was that a game that was constructed in the industry or by an indie game developer? It was actually, yes, there was a company, but it pretty much got started by one guy. The game was originally, Lemmings was originally created by one guy. So, you know, you can just go on and on. First-person shooters, did they get developed by companies like EA and you know, Ubisoft, or were they developed by, not one person in this case, but by some enthusiasts just sort of working in their bedrooms, you know, like the indie. It was an indie game. The Wolfenstein was the first, and then Doom. Indie games. Doom was released shareware originally. I remember, because I actually got the shareware thing, and I played Doom. And it was like, you know, amazing for the time. But they came from indie game developers. Sorry, I've gone off track again. Don't you know, I always do that. Rein me in.
Okay. And there was such a game I found, Three Lions. You designed it in the USA, and was it published or not?
Yeah, it was published. It got to #1, I believe, in the UK. But I can't really say that there's any artistic thing I was involved with the company that was making it. I was the director of that project. I didn't manage to get the game published that I wanted to have made, and things turned a bit sour, you know. But yeah, it got out there. But that was my time when I went to America, because I went to America because I realized there was no future for me as an independent game developer. Mm-hmm. After Microprose canned a PC football game that they wanted me to make, they sort of changed their strategy away from sports games, and they canned my project. And then I'm sitting there going, okay, what now? I think I'm just one person in an industry that doesn't like one-person people anymore. Can't have a two-person people. And so I said, I need to get management experience. I need to work with companies. I need to have more than just me. And so I went to America and worked for various... And so the first company I worked with was called Z-Axis, or as they say, Z-Axis. and because they were doing a football game, and that's it. But I don't consider it a Dino Dini game by any stretch of the imagination. It was difficult for me to make that transition, and I can't say that I made it flawlessly. I made mistakes, but I learnt an awful lot from it.
But it seems that there are better times for indie developers right now.
Yeah.
There are mobile platforms. Do you think about publish something on a mobile platform? Maybe a football game?
Well, I mean, I considered it. I even made a prototype. But the problem there is that in publishing on iOS, good positives and negatives. Positive is it had a low barrier to entry and some protection against piracy. It's the reason probably why we have an indie game scene again, frankly. When they did that and they didn't have high barriers and anybody could make a game, it was a wonderful thing. That's positive. On the negative side, everybody's doing it. So
because of the low level.
Because of the low level of entry. I mean, this is the whole classic thing. I mean, in a way, I understand why Sony made a ridiculously high level of entry when they created their console. It was done with a good reason, to not flood the market. But what they did was, you needed $20,000 to get a PlayStation 1 development kit. So come on, come on, guys. It's like we can't do that. And even if you put together the money and you made the game, there was no guarantee that Sony would approve the game. Come on, this is what happened in the midnight. So, I think everyone's learnt from their lessons here a little bit. But I've actually lost track of what I was saying, so because I went off on a tangent, so you have to pull me back now. What was the original thing I was answering?
About mobile platforms.
Mobile platforms. Okay. Oh, yeah, right, thank you. So I understand why they did it, but it caused a problem because there was no outlet other than PC for indie game developers. Great thing they did. Apple did a wonderful thing for the industry. They allowed indie game developers a chance. The problem is low barrier to entry, nobody knows who you are. So what happens is, even if you're someone like Jeff Minter, who's been publishing games on iOS, it's no easy road. It's not been easy for anybody.
But for you, it's and Jeff Minter, of course, it's a bit easier because you have a name, Dino Dini.
Yeah. Maybe it's a bit easier, but I had this monster.
Okay, but
the monster's behind me. You know what the monster's doing?
But he's not alive.
The monster, I can never get rid of the monster. I can only make peace with the monster and then look at it very suspiciously and carefully all the time to see what it's doing. But look, this is the monster, right, speaking to me. It says, Dino. It says, you release game iOS, it's a flop. You become nobody. Yeah. And that's scary. Maybe if I'd made peace with, maybe if I'd had a chat with John Hare 20 years ago, I might have been able to make peace with my monster sooner, and then maybe I would have been in time for the iOS thing before it got flooded. And look, here's the thing: it's a lottery. You go on iOS, it's a lottery. If you're going to make a game on iOS, it's a lottery. Do not expect to make any money. Do not put money that you can't afford to put into it. Do not sell your house or remortgage it. It is madness. You are entering a lottery. It's like the gold rush, and a lot of game development right now is like the gold rush. The only people making money are the people selling the shovels and the, selling the middleware, right? You go to make something for the asset store on Unity, and you might make some money. Unless you are very, very lucky, and if you're very lucky, then maybe you make the next Angry Birds or the next whatever, and then suddenly you'll have more money than you know what to do with, and your own pet monster. And that's it. This is not a business model. And
but do you want to try your luck?
No.
Why?
Well, mainly because of
monster. Okay.
Because the stakes are made higher for me because of the monster. I don't want people to remember me as the guy who tried to make a comeback on iOS and fell flat on his face. What I need, and it's exactly the same thing Jeff and other indie game developers need, is a viable business model. And that actually has to go back to the old one, which is, we know you're good at making games. You've proven it. I think I've proven it, right? I think Jeff has proven it, right? So here's some money, make us some games. We know there's no guarantee that they're going to be hits, but we know that if you're doing this, the chances of success are going to be a lot higher, and we will back you, and we will do the marketing, and we will help bring your game to market. And that's what publishers were supposed to do. That was always their job, and they kind of lost sight of that. And we need that back. And then the iOS and these other, that's great, carry on with it. That's where people can learn how to make games and how to sell games, and where you can start seeing the ones that really have promise, and then the industry can pick those and say, look, you worked for 5 years on your game, it's awesome, it's a shame that, you know, you're not, we can help you turn this into a viable living so that you can actually do the thing you love to do, which is make games, and do that for the rest of your life. What do you think? Yeah? You're going to to say that to me, I'm going to say, right on. You know? And that, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for a talk, and I hope sometime you will try your luck despite your monster.
Well, maybe there is some other solution. I don't think I'm going to be doing iOS anytime soon, but maybe there's another solution, and maybe there'll be some news soon.
So,
yeah.
thank you.
All right. Thank you.